Cliftonians, we're here at the altar today to preach about the Charge Barbarian. Not only is this build fast, strong, dynamic, requires no Ubers whatsoever. Stick with me today. I'm going to show you exactly what you need to do to get your build up and running. First, we're going to start off with a little bit of gameplay so you can see exactly what it looks like when we do a Tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon. Check it out. Here's the run. Tier 100 Nightmare Vault. Running Charge with HotA. So this is a very, very fast build. As you can see, not only does Hammer of the Ancients do a lot of the damage here, but Charge itself also does a lot of damage. So things you're going to have to worry about is your Charge cooldown management. Charge cools down with its skill points, and also we get cooldown from our shouts. So shouts, and the more enemies we hit, so Charge gains 3 seconds of cooldown for every enemy hit up to 9 seconds. So we always want to make sure that we're hitting packs of enemies with Charge, because if it's cooling down, we lose our source of Unstoppable. We also lose movement, and we also lose stun. So we want to make sure that we are always working to keep that cooldown down. Cooldown down. Keep that cooldown down. We're going to run through this dungeon here, get to the end so we can go over the good stuff. The gear. My little potions, little level 1 potions are working overtime here. That's what they like to do though. So Charge is a great source of resources. Gives you back Fury every time that you use Charge because we gain Unstoppable for it. That is through Tibolt's Will though. So if you're not running Tibolt's Will, it won't be giving you back resources, but it still is a great source of Unstoppable, which when you're running all of these dungeons is incredibly important. Most of the time you end up crowd controlled, you are dead. So we want to avoid getting crowd controlled at all times. Crowd control is anything that slows you down, stuns you, anything that makes you unable to attack, move, any impairment. So all of that. Like we've said before, you got to make sure that you watch for the ranged guys all the time, because the ranged abilities or ranged monsters in this dungeon, as you can see, hit very hard and can easily take that HP down to almost nothing, if not nothing. So anytime that you can close the gap using Charge on those ranged monsters, do it, because man, do they hurt. All right, we're going to go put this back, and we're going to go end up in that last little room there. This room is always fun because there's always stuff to hit. So let's just charge all over the place. So really great way to do this is to make sure that you're just charging right through the middle of everything so that you're always have your charge off of cooldown, and then you're charging through the middle, so this way if there is something that is exploding behind you, you always have it behind you and you don't have to worry too much about dying. So we just charge in circles. Every time we charge, we're using Hammer of the Ancients, we're avoiding dungeons, we're avoiding explosions, and then we are gonna finish. That's the run. We're going to go over the gear. Helmet, we're running Relentless Berserker. Juggernaut, we're running on our chest piece. Running Ancestral Force on the gauntlets. You could swap this out for elements if you want, but I really like having the extra damage for Hammer. Tibolt's Will. Ghost Walkers, so we can keep that movement speed up. Earthstriker on our two-hander. We're running Ancestral Charge. Veterans Brawler, Limitless Rage, Red Fear, Bear Clan's Berserker, and then we're running the Banished Lord's Talisman here. So that's the run, that's the gear. We'll see you back inside the room with all of the dummies in Kobashad so that we can hit some dummies and I can show you exactly what the rest of the build looks like. Alright, we made it. Safely back to the training grounds. Let's go over the skill points. Starting at the top, we are running just basics into Lunging Strike just to get our points in. We are maxing out Hammer of the Ancients, and then we're going all the way up into Furious. Coming down here, we're going to Rallying Cry, all the way through Tactical. If you're not having any resource issues, you can always take this out. Put in something like Movement Speed would be great. 1 point in a Challenging Shout, down to Enhanced Challenging Shout. And we're going into Warcry, all the way through Power Warcry. Again, if you don't feel like you need the extra damage and you want to put that into Movement Speed or extra DR somewhere down here, that's also an option. But you at least want to have Warcry and Enhanced Warcry. Put 5 points in the charge, and then we're coming all the way down into Power Charge. This is super, super important because when you hit 3 enemies or more, you've reduced your cooldown by 9 seconds. That combined with all of the other cooldown reduction that we use gets your charge to have almost no cooldown at all. It's very important. 3 points into Aggressive Resistance, Prolific Fury, 1 point into Battle Fervor, just so that we get a little bit of extra berserking. Pit Fighter, just 1 to Thick Skin, and then we're taking 2 in Defensive Stance for a little extra DR, and then Counteroffensive for a little extra offense. We're going all the way through Wallop, Brute Force, and Heavy Handed. Make sure we get a little bit some damage out to HotA because we still want to be able to do damage with Hammer of the Ancients because that's still a very big part of our damage here. All the way through Supreme Wrath of the Berserker, and then of course the almighty Unbridled Rage. Let's look at the Paragon board. For the starter board, we took Brawl. Brawling skills deal 18% X increased damage. Charge is a brawling skill. For the second board here, we took Bonebreaker, and we're actually going to come back around to this board later on. But for the Glyph, we took Immortal Draw. So every time we swap weapons, there's an 18% chance on that swap that it critically hits. And it also does almost 100% increased damage every time that we swap the weapon. So when we swap from Charge to Hammer and from Hammer to Charge, they both get increased damage from this Glyph. Our third board is Carnage. For the Glyph, we're running Martial. Martial is very important for this build because if we miss a charge, let's say we only hit 1 or 2 monsters and we only reduce that charge cooldown, Martial, after casting a shout skill, the active cooldown of every other non-shout skill is reduced by 4 seconds. So any shout will bring down the cooldown of our charge. So if we do end up missing, this is our lifesaver right here. That's our lifeline. The next board is Warbringer. We went with Crusher for this. So wielding a mace deals 30% X damage, increase overpower. That is for Hammer of the Ancients, because we're going to be always running Bludgeoning Weapon for Hammer. Then we're going to come over to Blood Rage. This is a great node. We're running 90% current bonus, which is huge. We're getting 90% X damage from all of the damage while berserking that we have. And of course, we're going to be running Ire with this. So Ire gives us increased damage while berserking, and while berserking we take reduced damage by 10% from elites. And this is the board that uniquely swings down back in so that we can take Bonebreaker. The reason we did this is because if we needed to get from here all the way up here, we would have done a ton more points than just going from here to here. And then your final board, all the way back down over here, is Decimator. For this one, we ended up going with Dominate. Pretty straightforward, almost 400% overpower damage. It's a huge damage modifier. After not overpowering for 30 seconds, your next attack will overpower. So that's the Paragon board. Time to break down the mechanics. This is a weapon swap build. That means that our Hammer of the Ancients and our charge needs to be set to a different weapon. Hammer of the Ancients is always set to a bludgeoning weapon. That's the weapon that it has to use. That means we have to change our charge. I always change charge to my sword, applies bleed, and the top end damage is a little bit more. By pressing down on the mouse wheel, I can switch my skills and my weapons. So if you look at the top end damage with the dual wield, it only goes to 93,000, and when we go back to my weapon, it goes up to 123,000. So it is a pretty significant jump. So we leave that on there. With charge, when we get to any boss, whether it's a Nightmare Dungeon boss, Uber Lilith, World boss, Duriel, any of those bosses are always unstoppable. One of the big mechanics of charge is that it grabs all of the enemies with them, pulls them to the very end or to a wall, and when they hit, you do a swing with your sword, and then that hits and does damage. When something's unstoppable, it doesn't get pulled with you. So you have to get the distance down in order for that swing to hit right when you get to that monster. On the controller, this is a lot more difficult to time out, but this is about the distance here. So if you charge and hit, that's the distance that you need. But if we're closer and we charge again, we're going to charge right through and we're going to hit the wall. The monsters don't come with us, and we miss our damage. When you're running a mouse and keyboard, whenever I am playing this here, we switch it up. Charge now becomes whatever distance you use on your mouse, and you can hit targets from whatever distance that you decide to be at. So if you're going to be running a keyboard and mouse, I always keep it on my mouse button so that wherever I click, that's where it goes. If I'm running on a controller, which most of the time I do, just probably because I'm a little lazy sometimes, you have to try and get that timing down. So now let's go over the cooldown reduction of charge. So we're going to put up just a regular single target here. So charge, if we look at it here, has a 12.58 second cooldown. So we could get a little bit more cooldown here. We don't have a lot. There's not much more that we can get there. And if we went some ranks to charge on your pants, you could do that too, but I really love the resources and the extra damage from to bolts. So we're looking at 12.58. So we hit one target, we're going to be reducing that cooldown. We now go down to 9 seconds. That's still a very long time. Let's add multiple targets in. So now we have multiple dummies. We charge. That goes down to 3 seconds. And this is where Marshall comes in. Let's say that I have a big group of going on, and I charge, and I need to get my charge back up. I use any shout, and charge comes back up. Any shout, charge comes back up. Any shout, charge comes back up. So now I have the option, if I'm in a tight spot, to charge, shout, charge, shout, charge, shout. Most of the time, that'll be enough to kill it because you've given yourself more damage, more movement speed, and resources, and you've given yourself unstoppable. So when we were breaking down the class, we said this is a weapon swap build. Why do we swap weapons, though? A couple of reasons. If we go to the Paragon board, we're running Mortal Draw, so every time that we swap weapons, we gain increased damage. We also get a 18% chance to make that skill critically hit. We are also running Earthstriker. So what Earthstriker does is that it makes your next non-basic attack, which would be either charge or HotA, hit for 100% increased overpowered damage, and it guarantees an overpower. What Earthstriker looks like is this little symbol down here. We have 6 procced out of the 8 times that you need to swap weapons. So how you swap weapons? We saw that we set our 2 different attacks, 2 different weapons. So now when I use charge, it gives me another stack of Earthstriker, and when I hammer, it gives me another stack. When you see the fist with the arrow, that is a guaranteed overpower at an increased damage rate. So when we come over here, if we hit, we get a guaranteed overpower. Doesn't mean that's going to crit, but we get a guaranteed overpower. So those are the reasons why we're swapping weapons with this build. We went over the aspects at the end of the run, but let's go into some more detail now. We're running Relentless Berserker. Our core skills have a 40% chance to increase the duration of berserking by 2 seconds. That's double, so 4 seconds if we critically strike with it. Your core skill that we're using is Hammer of the Ancients, so it is important that we consistently use Hammer to keep that berserking going. While you're berserking, you gain extra damage reduction and extra damage. Juggernauts. If it can fit into any build, this is the best defensive aspect out there. Just straight armor. We don't have to wait for anything like Disobedience for it to come up while we're doing damage. It puts me way over armor cap. I could always drop some armor here, but I am way over. Ancestral Force for that extra damage to Hammer of the Ancients. Ghost Walkers, because it gains 25% movement speed, allows us to pass through enemies. So if we have just a couple or left, or only 1 or 2 just sitting in the room and we don't want to charge and we don't want to hammer, we can just run straight through without getting stopped. We just covered Earthstriker. Very, very, very big damage modifier here. Now these next 2 skills are very, very necessary for this build. Charge calls forth 4 Ancients who charge, dealing 30% of the normal damage. Ancestral Charge is the name of the aspect. It puts the linebacker wall, which looks like this. All of those, they all grab enemies and they pull enemies with them, and then they stun them. It also counts as weapon swapping. So it is really, really, really important. Probably one of the most important aspects for this build. Veteran's Brawler. So each time a core skill deals direct damage to an enemy, the next charge or leap within 5 seconds increases damage up to 40%. So every time we use Hammer of the Ancients, which is a core skill, it increases the damage of our charge. So you hit damage and it's to an enemy. So if you hit HotA into a big group of enemies, shoot straight up to 40%, charge does a bunch more damage. Then we're running Limitless Rage. Pretty straightforward, extra 60% X on top of your core damage. So for your Hammer of the Ancients, which Hammer does a ton of damage for this build. Red Fear guarantees that you're going to be critting with Hammer of the Ancients. Also a lot of resource gen, max fury, and attack speed, which is all, I mean, this ring is just amazing. Bear Clan Berserker Ring. I can't demo this in this room because we need to be killing enemies, but we have a 40% chance to grant 32% increased cooldowns or reduction to brawling skills for 2 seconds. So every time we kill something, our cooldown on charge drops down significantly. Well, we have a chance to, but it procs all the time because we hit things so often. And then we're running Banished Lord's Talisman. Last but not least, this little guy here. We can't forget about him. Let's go over his setup. I'm running Tempest and Flash of Adrenaline for my Governing Stones. We're running Breaking Support. This is where our vulnerable damage comes from. We're not running Exploit Glyph. That's the option right there. Fortify Support. We don't have Warbringer node, which grants us Fortify on Fury Spent. So we get all of our Fortify from this right here, which actually goes up relatively quickly. And I'm running Evernight. If you don't have Evernight, a really good option would be something like Resource Support here. You could throw Resource Support on there, or you could run something like Arcing Support here. On the other side, I'm running Flash of Adrenaline. We're running Tactical Support. So Tactical Support decreases the cooldown of the supported skill. Flash of Adrenaline is the supported skill. So it increases the cooldown. So now we have a 12-second cooldown. Duration Support, that decreases, or that increases the skill's duration by 4 seconds, which brings the duration up to 12 seconds, which means that there's no downtime on Flash of Adrenaline when you're in combat. I'm also running Genesis here, so that increases the damage number from 20% to 50%. If you wanted to run something else there, you could run something like Safeguard Support, so for that extra damage reduction if you didn't have Genesis. That's Charge in a nutshell. It is a very fun, very fast build, super dynamic. Let me know what you think of the build. Give it a shot. Let me know in the comments if you got any questions. I'm happy to help. I hope this was very helpful for you guys. Have a great night.